A few weeks ago, Senegalese player Crépin Diatta lashed out at people, especially Africans, who mocked his physical appearance during the last African Cup of Nations. This is what he said on social media. "I am very sad to see some African brothers making fun of me. I work for our beautiful and dear African continent, and what I receive in return are only insults and mockery from my brothers. This is too bad of you, and racism comes from there. I need your encouragement and not your insults. I thank all the people who are supporting me. Only God makes my strength, and I am proud of my physical appearance. Your mockery won't change anything in my life. But one thing is for sure. We are all Africans." This happened a few weeks ago, but it wasn't the first time that Crépin Diatta experienced those mockeries. During the previous African Cup, he also experienced the same thing. Now you may be wondering, why am I talking about this, and what does it have to do with history? So, get comfortable, get some popcorns, and let me tell you a story. A little story. We are in 1993. Anthony Pharaoh, Kourosh Zarinla, and Khosrow Azizi, three researchers, have decided to conduct a study to uncover the aesthetic preferences of Black Americans when it comes to their facial profile. The initiative emerged when the research team observed that orthodontic literature contains many studies on cephalometry and profile standards of white patients, but little reference is made to Black patients. It was intriguing. And with orthodontic treatment becoming increasingly popular among all races, it was crucial to have a broader representation of dentofacial relationships for each race. The study. Black American faces can have various looks due to admixtures between African, white, and Indian groups. However, despite this diversification, the study found that there was one common facial type that is frequently treated by orthodontists, known as bimaxillary protrusion. Bimaxillary protrusion refers to the condition in which some individuals' front teeth in both the top and bottom jaws protrude, meaning that they extend beyond or above a surface. This can cause the lips to stick out as well, giving the face a rounded appearance. It's similar to pushing your lips forward and showing your teeth, but in this case, it occurs all the time. This is a feature that orthodontists often see in Black Americans. The study aimed to determine the profile that Black Americans prefer and found that the BMJ, or Bimax 1, profile was the clear choice among Black respondents. The BMJ profile combines features of both a conventional white profile and an ethnic Black profile. The study also found that the S-straight profile, which simulates the Black version of a straight white profile, was a close second choice, with the BMJ, Bimax 1, profile coming in third. Previous studies on Indian and Arab groups also concluded that both groups preferred the straight profile type. What's next? However, there is kind of a problem with those conclusions. The difference with Black Americans is that the straight profile type is considered the most common or natural profile type in all other populations. In the case of African Americans, their natural profile is the one with bimaxillary protrusion. But this trend of discomfort with one's natural appearance is not limited to African American populations alone. In fact, this sentiment can be observed among Black African populations globally. As we can see it in this video's intro, there is a huge problem with the natural African phenotype. Crépin Diatta has a face displays a very strong degree of prognathism, a bit above average, while also displaying a very dark skin. Two features that are natural in African populations. To this day, skin bleaching is a problem all over Africa and in the Caribbean. It is important to note that this is not a criticism of individual preferences, but rather a recognition of a wider societal issue. We must consider the ways in which the media and cultural stereotypes shape perceptions of beauty and the impact this has on individuals' self-image. So, we can clearly see that individuals of African descent seem to dislike what they naturally look like. Why? Probably because of the event that I am about to tell you now. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Prognathism. Prognathism, characterized by the forward projection of the lower face relative to the upper face, is prevalent among individuals of African descent. It is important to remember that not all Africans have this specific phenotype, but it is probably the original human phenotype, meaning that most of our ancestors carried a variant of it. But later on, with an increase in human diversity, some human groups started to develop other cranial structures due to mutations caused by many other factors like environment. And those differences later led to deeper issues. The colonial period witnessed the emergence of pseudoscientific theories that aimed to justify the subjugation and exploitation of African populations. We must keep in mind that through time, less and less people still carried these features. And today, the great majority of them are found within the African continent. So, early European scholars, influenced by deeply ingrained racial biases, used prognathism to support the notion of a hierarchical racial structure, positioning Africans at the bottom. They started using the original feature to link Africans to monkeys, thus claiming that they had a lower level of intelligence, drawing on the distorted idea of an evolutionary hierarchy. This dehumanizing comparison aimed to reinforce stereotypes and justify the exploitation of African peoples during the era of slavery and colonization. Europeans systematically constructed a racial hierarchy based on looks that positioned themselves at the apex, categorizing Africans as inferior based on physical features like prognathism. This hierarchy, fueled by racism, was perpetuated through various means, including literature, art, and even pseudoscientific studies. The racial hierarchy, with prognathism as a supposed marker of inferiority, facilitated the brutal colonization and oppression of African societies. European powers used these unfounded beliefs to legitimize their exploitative practices, creating lasting consequences for African nations and their people. Despite the unjust narratives surrounding African features, African communities resisted and reclaimed their cultural identity. Efforts to counter the racist ideologies included celebrating indigenous histories, challenging Eurocentric standards, and fostering a sense of pride in African features like afros, melanin, and more. But the historical misuse of prognathism still echoes in contemporary society, with remnants of racial biases persisting, as we can see it in the case of Crepin Diata. Acknowledging this historical context is essential for dismantling deeply ingrained stereotypes and fostering a more inclusive and equitable future. Now we see why that feature leads to a lot of racism and self-hatred. The people mocking Crepin Diata are not white. They are black, meaning that the issue is deeper than we think. Every year, I receive thousands of racist memes on my pages, mocking black people and their prognathism, displaying that feature as the mark of inferior lunatics who can't have anything to do with civilizations and who try to steal other people's civilizations. But all these people are completely delusional. Here's why. Civilization. Civilization. That's a powerful word, right? A word symbolizing greatness and everything noble, but also a word that has been weaponized all over the slavery and colonial eras. For example, Western nations use the expression civilizing mission. It refers to a concept often used to justify colonialism by suggesting that the colonial nations believed they were bringing civilization, education, and progress to the colonized territories. With that colonial heritage, our perception of anything related to civilization leads us to Europe, to whiteness, and more importantly to what people call Caucasian features. And you'll understand why this is important soon. The reason why people make these memes is because to them, nothing that looks like this can be linked to civilization and all the greatness that is attached to that concept. On the other hand, it is easier to connect this feature to everything that is inferior, such as slavery, etc. Isn't it? Why? Because of everything we mentioned earlier, that racist colonial heritage. It deemed African traits as inferior, but the current exploitation of African countries also contributes to that. But is it true? Is it really legitimate to think so? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to look into history. From my research, prior to colonization, black people had a strong connection to their true selves and would have never considered changing themselves. By the way, this is one of the reasons why on this platform, we focus on the colonial period. It can be seen in ancient African art. They were not trying to make themselves look a bit more like Europeans. Evidence that they did not see any problem with it. They truly loved themselves. However, after centuries of invasions, colonizations, oppressions, segregations, and deportations, a systematic effort to devalue and dehumanize black people emerged. This led to a manipulation of their self-perceptions, especially concerning their physical characteristics. Because as I said earlier, Europeans' racial theories were mainly based on what people looked like. Based on your appearance, you are either superior or inferior. So, everything related to blackness was demonized. This created a lot of complexes. It reminds me of this video of Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Because in Nigeria, I didn't think of myself as black, because nobody thinks of themselves as black in Nigeria. We have many problems, but race is not one of them, because I guess most people in Nigeria are black. In many West African countries, we don't have race as an identifying part of us. So when I went to the US, all I had thought of myself was a Catholic and Igbo. And Nigerian, of course. But then in the US, people would just say things to me about being black, and I would think, I don't even know what that means. But most of all, it was that I started to learn that black wasn't a value-free idea. That to be called black was that people made assumptions about you. There was a professor who was surprised that I wrote the best essay in class. And I realized that he was surprised because he didn't expect a black person to write the best essay. And so for me, it was a learning process. Of course, now I very much identify as black. And I've also come to learn about African American history and to deeply admire that history is a history of African Americans who are very resilient, who have systematically and consistently been undermined by the American state, and who continue to thrive. And I think that African American history is under-celebrated.
She explains that she didn't know that she was black and that it was a problem until she lived in the USA. In other words, those inferiority complexes, that unease, is not inherent to black people. They are the result of their encounter with other people who look different from them. So, I decided to dig a bit deeper and look at pre-colonial civilizations. And here's what I found. History. Let's go back to 1782. This is Constantin François de Chassepouf, more commonly known as Comte de Volney. He was a French philosopher, abolitionist, writer, Orientalist, and politician who was made commander of the Legion of Honor in 1804, Count of the Empire in 1808, and a peer of France by Louis XVIII. He embarked on a journey to the east in late 1782 and reached Egypt, where he spent nearly 7 months. There, he saw the Great Sphinx. And upon seeing him, he commented this: "Having visited the Sphinx and seeing this head characterized by Negro features and all its traits, there was no doubt the ancient Egyptians were true Negroes of the same species as all the natives of Africa. To think that this race of black men, today our slave and the object of our contempt, is the very one to whom we owe our arts, our sciences, and the use of speech." Now you may be wondering why I am talking about this. I want you to bear with me a bit more. I have something interesting for you at the end of this video. This is Dominique Vivant Denon, a French artist, writer, and archaeologist. He also visited Egypt around the same period, but this time during Napoleon's campaign in the country. In his book Voyage dans la basse et la haute Égypte pendant les campagnes du General Bonaparte, after seeing the Great Sphinx, he wrote this: "Though its proportions are colossal, the outline is pure and graceful, the expression of the head is mild, gracious, and tranquil, the character is African, but the mouth, and lips of which are thick, has a softness and delicacy of execution truly admirable, it seems real life and flesh." Art must have been at a high pitch when this monument was executed, for, if the head wants what is called style, that is to say, the straight and bold lines which give expression to the figures under which the Greeks have designated their deities, yet sufficient justice has been rendered to the fine simplicity and character of nature which is displayed in this figure. We see that the adjectives used to define the Sphinx are Negro and African. Many people claim that African does not necessarily mean black, yet we all know that most North Africans specifically use it to identify the people living below the Sahara. And I guess that's what Vivant Denon meant. Both are describing a character that is specific to black people. And in case some of you have doubts, we have this piece of art from him. It is obvious that what he was saying is that the Sphinx depicts a black African. But what is the trait that makes the Sphinx look black? Because it may seem like skin color is what makes people look black. But that's not the case. The Sphinx lost its color a long time ago. But despite that lack, we can still see that it is the face of a black African. So, skin color is not solely what makes someone look black. For example, there are Indians who are darker in complexion than Africans. But none of US would say that they look like black Africans. So what is it? Well, as you probably guessed it, it is subnasal prognathism. The skull's bone structure with that protruding jaw. When looking at the Sphinx, we see that his skull's shape is identical to those of black people from the South. Now you are probably thinking, we've already talked about this. And that's true. But there is still a problem with this statement, and I'm about to explain it now. The Sphinx problem. We all know the Sphinx and all the theories related to him. I have made a video about him and you can watch it here. But there is a huge problem with the Sphinx. I have noticed a trend when people talk about it. Many people don't really understand its significance. Well, I think they do, but at the same time they don't. Let me explain. Most people perceive it as some random Egyptian relic. As if it was just some piece of art hanging in there, created to look mysterious, but that had nothing to do with the actual people of Kemet. Have you noticed that too? People don't really understand how significant it is for the identity of that civilization and its people. We've all heard the debate about who built it at least once, but the idea still seems to not penetrate our brains. That's why I will try to go a bit deeper today. The Great Sphinx is not just a random ornament for tourists. It represents a pharaoh. But not some random pharaoh. It represents one of the most powerful pharaohs ever. The most powerful individual in that country and in world's history. And that pharaoh is linked to the greatest, most ancient, and mysterious wonder of the ancient world. The only one that still stands today. The Great Pyramid. A marvel, symbol of the ingenuity of the greatest civilization on Earth and of its people. So, if we use common sense, the Great Sphinx represents ancient Egypt through the representation of one of its most iconic pharaohs. And thus by association, he is the representation of the indigenous people of that civilization. Especially those in power. But let's go a bit deeper. I think that examples can help us understand this. Here are some of the tallest statues in the world. The Spring Temple Buddha in China, 128 meters or 420 feet. The Statue of Unity in India, 182 meters or 597 feet. Ushikudaibutsu Daibutsu in Japan, 120 meters or 390 feet. The Motherland Calls in Russia, 85 meters or 280 feet. The Statue of Liberty in the United States, 93 meters or 305 feet. The African Renaissance Monument in Senegal, 52 meters or 171 feet. All of them come from completely different countries, right? But they all have something in common. Do you know what? If you guessed it, pause the video and write it in the comments. Okay, here's the answer. They are all created at the image of the population of their respective countries. In other words, they look like the average inhabitant of their country, or at least of the main group of the country at the moment they've been built. The people in power. The Spring Temple Buddha looks Chinese, the Statue of Unity looks Indian, the Ushikudaibutsu Daibutsu looks Japanese, the Motherland Calls looks European, the Statue of Liberty looks like the ruling class of the United States, in other words, white European, and the African Renaissance family looks black. And that's exactly how we should perceive the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx is not only at the image of the pharaoh who built one of the greatest pyramids of Giza. He also represents the whole royal family of that pharaoh, since the three pyramids belong to a father and his two sons. And by association he represents the ruling class and finally the people of that civilization. That's why he has been built there, and that's why he is so huge. These types of projects are not only representative of the ruler who made them, but they are created to represent the whole nation as a symbol of pride and identity. They are supposed to last centuries and even millennia. This is what most people don't understand when they look at the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx represents the average Egyptian at that time. There is absolutely no reason for people who looked Caucasian to build such a monument and make it look like a foreign and hostile group of people. But most people seem to miss that point. We treat it as an irrelevant random decoration. But maybe you are doubting me. Maybe you think that I went too far, making connections that don't exist. That the Sphinx is just representative of one king. Well, that's why I want you to watch this.
Who were the Badarians? Most experts, like Sonia R. Zakrzewski, demonstrated that ancient Egypt's development was primarily indigenous. That is, the individuals who built that civilization already lived in that territory right before its appearance. Who were they? According to studies, a few major cultural groups inhabited in the area before the dynastic period. The Badarians were among them. They lived in Middle Egypt. So, what did they look like? Numerous Western anthropologists who studied them provided answers. They discovered that the Badari people had short cranial vaults and significant subnasal prognathism, which is the anterior projection of the lower face relative to the upper face. This feature is the most observed among black Africans, contrary to other groups who have little to no prognathism. So, Egypt's indigenous inhabitants, the Badarians, were black Africans. This type of skulls have also been discovered in all locations surrounding Egypt. It's also clearly apparent on Egypt's most iconic monument, the Great Sphinx. However, this is the topic of our next video. Like, subscribe and activate the bell.
From this footage and these studies, we see that the features seen on the Great Sphinx are not the exception that proves the rule. They are the norm in indigenous populations of Kemet, especially among the members of the elite. That feature is today almost exclusive to people of African descent or black people, as we can see on Crepin Diata, for example. It also contributes to the so-called condition studied in the previous study by maxillary protrusion. Here's a fun fact about prognathism. Did you know that it is also the leading, if not the main cause of another common African feature? It is thick lips. Yes, subnasal prognathism causes lips to develop that way.
To Dr. Zahi Hawass, an award-winning, world-renowned archaeologist. His life's work has been dedicated to the discovery and research of ancient Egyptian antiquities. Not surprisingly, his office is full of books on the topic, some of which depict dark-skinned ancient Egyptians. But he says there's an explanation.
No, they were dark-skinned,
But they were not black.
But they're not Negro. Because look at the lips of the Negroes like that and the nose like this. It's not really the Egyptian origin at all. It's different, completely different. And this is why you cannot connect the Egyptian civilization with the African at all. It's different. Or from Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, it's different, completely.
We spoke to Dr.
That's funny because that's another feature that has been completely demonized by the West for a very long time. But contrary to what Zahi Hawass and the mainstream are saying, the great majority of pharaohs had thick lips. But you don't know it because they never show you the main statues. The number of mummies and skeletons displaying those African features in ancient Egypt is crazy. But they chose to only display a minority of mummies carrying features that are today associated with the West. They usually show some random low-class individuals, or they select a few statues that have thin lips, or statues whose authenticity is questionable. But this completely confirms what I just told you. We see that pharaohs were usually depicted with thick lips. We know that subnasal prognathism is one of the main reasons behind natural thick lips. So, it means that pharaohs' skulls must have been prognathic. That's logic, right? The irony is that today, thick lips and many other African features that were once demonized are among the most revered features. People are ready to invest a lot to get those injections. Anyway, just like Zahi, most internet North Africans still mock subnasal prognathism and thick lips through racist memes like these, calling it slaves' feature and saying that their ancestors did not look like that. And we see that even black people mock their own features. But obviously, most people are uneducated and are getting it completely wrong. For example, that meme should actually look like this. We see that prior to the brainwashing and whitewashing that occurred with colonization, it was linked to royalty in ancient Egypt. A symbol of pharaohs, of the upper class of the greatest civilization that keeps inspiring us today. But most people can't perceive it that way. And this is due to the destruction of the African image. You can see it in movies like Exodus Gods and Kings, for example. On the left you have the real Great Sphinx, and on the right you have the one created in the movie. These are subliminal messages created to mold our perception of that ancient civilization. It contributes to the problem I exposed here. We end up looking at things and not really seeing it. That's why people make memes like these. I'm pretty sure they've all seen the Sphinx, but it never crossed their minds that he is black and that he represents an iconic king and his people. Anyone who understands this can see how stupid it is. But as I said, most of us don't live in reality when talking about ancient Egypt. We are wrapped in a fake reality, imagining that they looked like this, despite the evidence being literally in front of our eyes. The Sphinx is still there though, looking majestic. Anyway, now we can see that there is an image problem. Our perception of these African features is extremely biased. Crepin Diata is literally being mocked for looking like a pharaoh. Can you imagine that? Our brother looks like a king, and even black people are making fun of him, despite the fact that he is extremely talented, wealthy, and that he's doing better than most of us. This comes from a lack of knowledge and a distorted perception of reality. Evidence that there is a link between ancient history and our current lives. With these videos and posts, we aren't simply telling irrelevant stories from the past. We are literally impacting and improving the lives of a lot of people today by correcting our perception of reality. This is why rebranding the image of Africa is necessary. There has been a theft of soft power that is still going on. Something I have been talking about for years. I even made a video about it here. If history was told the right way, if the image of Africa and the world's perception of Kemet was not distorted, these problems would not even exist. And Crepin Diata would not be discriminated and mocked. Because people respect civilizations, they respect greatness, they respect ancient Egypt, and they know and respect the pharaohs. And since the pharaohs were black people, that many even looked like Crepin Diata, automatically, that respect would have reflected itself on him. He would have never experienced that hatred, that discrimination, or those mockeries. He would have received respect and admiration for looking like a pharaoh. But instead, that positive energy is going to people who had nothing to do with that civilization. People think that pharaohs looked like this. So, the benefits of that heritage are not going to Africans, the true beneficiaries. I hope that now you understand the theft of soft power that is going and why it must be stopped. So, the unique features that makes the Sphinx African and beautiful, that is the symbol of the builders of the greatest civilization on earth, is today often seen as a defect that many Africans are mocking and are seeking to change. We should celebrate these ancestral features. Cherish them. See the beauty within them, because they are a reminder of our common ancestors and of their greatness. Evidence that we don't have to look like others to be beautiful or great. It's an heritage we should be proud of, not something we should make fun of or try to erase. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Is there a soft power theft going on? Is it affecting Africans? Do you think that teaching true African history and rebranding Africa can significantly improve the lives of black people? Let me know if you agree with my conclusions in the comments below. Thanks for watching Mr. Imhotep's channel, and see you in the next one.